In this video, I'm going to cover everything that you need to know in order to lease a vehicle without getting fucked from the perspective of someone with a degree in finance. And at the end, we will also cover how to judge your deal so you know you're getting a good one. And yes, I understand that if you just want to save as much money as possible, then buying is better. You should buy an affordable vehicle and drive it for 10 to 12 years until the wheels fall off. I get that, but some people don't want to do that. And if you learn the ins and outs of leasing, you could potentially be able to drive a brand new vehicle every 2 to 3 years, always be in warranty, never have to change your brakes, never have to change your tires, and always have the latest tech for not that much more than buying it. And yes, it will be more, but for some people, that's worth it. So let's cover everything that you need to know so that you can be the shark, not the minnow at the dealership. Let's get started. Do not put money down on a lease. I see people on the Lease Hacker, Reddit, and Edmunds forums make this mistake constantly. And I understand why. You put money down, you have a lower monthly payment. But when it comes to a lease or even a purchase, you should judge that deal based on the total money spent over the entirety of the life of that deal. And when you do that and you add back in the down payment, when it comes to a lease, you're usually not saving that much, maybe a couple $100s. And by putting money down on a lease specifically, you risk two massive things: opportunity cost and risk of loss. How much money could that down payment be making you if you instead invested it or put it in a high yield savings account? And much more importantly, down payments on a lease in the event of an accident, if the car is totaled, means that money goes poof. It's gone. You will not get it back. And for that alone is why pretty much every leasing expert will only negotiate based on no money down. So going forward in this guide, we're going to assume no money down. This also means no trade-ins. If you have a vehicle that you want to trade in, that should be separate to the lease deal and really shouldn't even be brought up to the dealer. You should negotiate a deal that you like based on zero down, and then only after talk about how much you could potentially get for your trade-in, which you will want to receive in cash, not in credit to lower the monthly payments. Okay? Okay. Now, before we move on to the next thing, there is a difference between money down and due at signing. Money down is a cap cost reduction. It reduces the cap cost of the vehicle. We don't ever do this. Due at signing is different, and it can include things like first month's payment, taxes, registration, etc. It's also highly dependent on which state you live in, because taxes, incentives, and registration costs are different from state to state. With that said, if you want to lease like a pro and you really want to get a good deal, you should negotiate based on zero due at signing as well, because most fees, taxes, and registration can be rolled into the monthly payment. And when you compare your deal to the pros on Lease Hacker or Edmunds, the crazy deals that they are getting are a lot of times with zero due at signing. So zero down always, and zero due at signing almost always. Now, there is one other version of this that we have to talk about, and that is MSDs, or multiple security deposits. These are down payments that are fully refundable at the end of a lease, and they help to lower the overall monthly payment. These are acceptable, but once again, you need to compare the savings from using them against what you would have made in, say, a high-yield savings account. In some instances, though, it does make sense. Okay, let's move on, but even with this one thing, you'll already be able to avoid terrible deals, like the heartbreaking ones I see all the time on Reddit. Knowledge is power. The money factor, or MF, on a lease is basically the APR, given to you in a fucking confusing format. So instead of looking like this, it looks like this. But you can use a money factor calculator online to convert it into APR. Regardless, here's the thing about money factor. It can be marked up by the dealer, which means you need to know what the base money factor is. So if you spot something else on the contract, you know that the dealer is marking it up and you can negotiate it down. Now, how do you find the money factor for a specific vehicle? Edmunds. Type in the car you want, followed by Edmunds forum, and 9 out of 10 times you will find the base money factor from the manufacturer. Not much to talk about here, except that you need to know the base money factor from the manufacturer before you sign the contract, and you need to make sure that it's not being marked up by the dealer. The residual is basically the amount that the manufacturer believes the vehicle will be worth at the end of a lease. This number is set in stone and cannot be changed or negotiated at the dealership. So the higher the residual, usually the better a car will lease. Because at the end of the day, a lease is basically paying for the depreciation over a set period. So a car with, say, a 70% residual will usually lease better than a car with, say, a 50% residual, because the amount that you are responsible for paying during the lease is 30% as opposed to 50%. So when it comes to leasing, the perfect scenario for you is one of these two: a high residual and a low actual value at the end of a lease, because in this scenario, you paid a much smaller portion than you otherwise would have if you bought it and then tried to sell it after the same period. Or secondly, a high residual with an even higher value at the end of a lease. Why? Because in this instance, you can actually buy out your lease and then immediately sell it back for a profit to, say, CarMax. Now, this is rare, but it is possible. Ask me how I know. Regardless, all else being equal, the higher the residual, usually the better the potential lease. Your standard lease is 36 months. With that said, 24 months and 39 months are also very common. The thing you need to watch out here mostly is to make sure that the reason the deal seems good is not that the dealer is stretching a 36-month contract into a 39-month lease. The longer the lease term, obviously the lower the lease payment. And that's because depreciation on a vehicle is front-loaded. But also, the longer the lease term, the more it starts to resemble buying or financing. All in all, most best lease deals to have usually come in the form of the standard 36-month lease, although there are some exceptions. Like, for example, right now, Hyundai is basically giving away its electric vehicles on a 24-month lease. But usually, on average, 36 months is where you'll find the best deals. This one is very important. Leases have lengths, like 36 months, and they have miles per year, like 10,000, 12,000, or 15,000. Although 7,500 is also very common, especially on high-end vehicles. The point is, do not take a lower mileage lease than you need to just to get a better monthly payment. If you drive 12,000 miles per year on average, do not take a 10,000 mile per year lease. There are fees for miles over the limit, and these can range anywhere from 10 cents all the way to 25 cents per additional mile. Now, it's not measured year by year, but in total. So a 36-month lease with 10,000 miles per year means that at the end of the 36 months, any miles over 30,000 will incur additional costs. Is this a big deal if you drive like a couple hundred miles over? No. But if you're a few thousand miles over, this can amount to extra hundreds of dollars. So always negotiate a deal based on the closest mileage you drive on average per year. How do you actually negotiate a deal? Well, residual is locked in and can't be changed. And as long as you make sure that they're not marking up the money factor, there's really only one place left to negotiate a good deal. And that is selling price. The more that you can negotiate off the MSRP of a vehicle, the better deal you're going to get. Oh, and dealers will almost always try to add additional items to pump up the price. When you are negotiating a lease, getting rid of all the dealer add-ons and then getting as much as possible off the MSRP is how you will strike a really good deal. Because honestly, the rest of the equation is just them entering numbers on a computer, which spits out the final deal. In fact, MSRP is so important that some pro leasers and lease brokers, people who negotiate lease deals for others for a fee, will a lot of the times recommend only focusing on negotiating MSRP. And only if and when you get a good discount explaining that you want to lease. Which in a sense does make sense, because whether you lease, buy, or finance is more of a question on how you plan to fund the vehicle. And if you can first negotiate a solid discount off of MSRP, then leasing becomes simple. Make sure the money factor is not marked up, and make sure the residual is correct. But there is one other piece to the puzzle before we talk about how we can actually figure out if it's a good deal, and that is incentives. Dealers sometimes offer incentives. States also sometimes offer incentives. For example, dealers offer loyalty, veteran, college grad, and other discounts. And the state or the federal government sometimes also offer discounts like the current $7,500 electric vehicle incentive. Once you have negotiated a solid discount off of MSRP, then and only then should you talk about incentives. You should be aware of all the current incentives as they change on a month-to-month basis. And you should make sure that you are getting absolutely every single one that applies. If you do this, it means that you will have gotten a solid discount off of MSRP. You would have also made sure that every single applicable incentive is applied, and you will know that the money factor is not marked up and the residual is correct. This means that you are on track to getting the best deal possible for that given vehicle. But how do we know that the best deal possible for that given vehicle is actually a good deal? Because not all brands or makes lease well, and it is highly determined by the residual and how much discount you can get, which is in turn highly determined by supply and demand. An in-demand vehicle is going to be harder to get a good discount on compared to one that might not be selling as well. So remember that, as with many things in economics, it can come down to something simple like supply and demand. So how do we actually judge a deal? Let's talk about it. So when it comes to actually judging your deal, I would say there is a general guideline and 2 actual ways to judge it, for a total of 3 things we need to cover. First, the general guideline. This is a good rule of thumb to quickly gauge a deal, and that is the 1% rule. Basically, if you can get the effective monthly lease payment to 1% or less than the MSRP of the vehicle, then it may be a good deal. But you still have to use the other 2 methods to confirm. Now, before we continue, I said effective payment. What does that mean? Basically, the total cost for the lease divided by the months in the lease. Remember, down payment and due at signing are part of the total cost. So if you want to lease a vehicle with a $30,000 MSRP and it's a 36-month lease, the 1% rule would dictate a monthly payment of no more than $300. But it doesn't count if you get a $300 monthly payment, but you also put $3,000 down or due at signing, because you would calculate that by doing 300 times 36 months plus 3,000, which equals 13,800, divided by 36 months, which equals about $383, which is more than 1% of the MSRP. Instead, you would need a $300 monthly payment with nothing down or due at signing except the first month's payment. Or you need a $216 a month payment and $3,000 down, because either of those 2 deals equals 1% of the MSRP per month. Now, we did say we don't want to put money down for other reasons, mostly risk of loss. But I used money down in this example to show you 2 different scenarios that both could be considered good deals based on the 1% rule. But remember, this is only a guideline. So now let's talk about the two ways to actually judge your deal. The first is the Lease Hacker score, and the second is comparing your deal to others. And both are important because the Lease Hacker score compares your lease against all other leases in general. And comparing your deal to others compares how good your deal is on a specific car to what other people have been able to achieve. So, Lease Hacker score first. Lease Hacker is a website dedicated to leasing. And basically, their lease calculator, after you put in all the information about your deal, gives you a score in years. For example, a Lease Hacker score of 7 means that it would take 7 years at your monthly payment to spend the MSRP of that vehicle. This means that the higher the score, the better, because it would take you longer at your payment to spend an amount equal to the MSRP of that vehicle. And this is where things get interesting, because now you can compare your lease directly to owning that same vehicle. If, say, on average, a car's lifespan is 12 years, then the closer the Lease Hacker score is to 12 years, the less advantage buying has to leasing. Because if you buy a car at MSRP and it lasts you 12 years, then effectively someone who constantly gets leases with a score of at least 12 years is really not spending any more money than the person buying it and driving it for 12 years, while still simultaneously having the benefit of getting a new car every 2 to 3 years. Now, a Lease Hacker score of 12 is rare, and that's why I say buying a car is still overall cheaper. Plus, this is comparing leasing to purchasing at MSRP, which a lot of people are still able to negotiate under even when purchasing. The point is, the higher the score, the better. For example, the 1% rule would mean 100 monthly payments to get to the MSRP. 100 months is 8.3 years, or a Lease Hacker score of 8.33. So that might be considered the bare minimum good deal for some, or an average deal for others. But some good baselines are 8 years is an average deal. Still way better than what most people who don't know what they're doing or didn't watch this video can get. Now, 9 is a better deal. 10 is a pretty damn good deal. 11 is like stellar. And 12 years and beyond are basically unicorn deals where everything just lined up perfectly. But the Lease Hacker score is just part one of a two-part comparison. The next is comparing your deal to what others have been able to get for the same car. And this can be done by perusing the web. The Lease Hacker forum, the Edmunds forum, and the Lease Hacker forum on Reddit are great places to look. Basically, Google something like 2024 Toyota Corolla Lease Reddit, or 2025 Honda Civic Lease Hacker, or 2026 Audi A4 Edmunds. And then go onto those forums and read and read and read. And after 20 or 30 minutes, you'll have a pretty good understanding of what other people, usually lease experts, are able to get for the vehicle that you want. And preferably, your deal will have both a high Lease Hacker score and be pretty similar to what other people are getting. But if you're only getting one or the other, for example, a good Lease Hacker score, but not as good as what other people are getting, this means financially it's probably a good deal, but when compared to others, you're getting ripped off. Or maybe you're getting a good deal compared to others, but it has a low Lease Hacker score. This means you're at least not getting ripped off, but that particular vehicle may just not lease well. Now, to me, I want both. I want a good financial deal and a good deal compared to others. But simply the fact that different states have different taxes, different incentives, different registration costs, and different demand for different vehicles, plus a million other things, means that that is not always possible. There you have it. I think that is probably the most comprehensive guide to leasing that I can put together. Whether you are just here because you love learning, or you're here because you are heavily considering leasing a car, I hope this video was super informative, and I hope it serves you well in the future. And if you did enjoy the video, please consider subscribing. It helps out the channel tremendously. And if you like personal finance, world economics, and investing, you are in the right place. So I hope to see you in the next video. Other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.